Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and welcome to the show that goes beyond the data to explore the people, the stories, and the insights that drive real business success. Thanks for joining us. I know that many of you listen to this program while you're at the gym exercising. So, gang, this one's for you. We're going to be talking about exercise today. Well, actually, we're going to be talking about exercising your mental muscles. And I'm pleased to welcome Scott Mautz, who's the author of The Mentally Strong Leader. He's the founder and CEO of Profound Performance. Scott, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thanks so much, Dave. So great to be here. I'm looking forward to getting into mental strength, and we'll get into that exercise you were talking about in a non-painful way for your listeners.
That sounds great. No stretching required, right?
That's right. That's right.
Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about your company?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Scott Mautz. I'm the CEO and founder of Profound Performance, and I'm an ex-Procter Gamble senior executive that took kind of all of his knowledge and passion for what I'd learned about leadership and, kind of went out and started my own company for keynoting, for training, for courses. I write books on the topics and all of that. And it's kind of brought me to today and my passion and my interest in the topic of mental strength, which we'll get into to defining in a moment. But probably like a lot of the folks you have on your show, Dave, I'm a really passionate practitioner as well as a researcher. So I don't just have, stories to tell. I have all kinds of data to go behind what we're going to talk about here today.
Love when we go into the data and it supports all these great subjects. But before we jump into the topic here, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about your why? What inspired you to start your company and to go on this journey?
Yeah, I think over time, Dave, I just, I learned that there's so many folks out there that just need practical, pragmatic help in becoming the best version of themselves. I was lucky to work at a company that, did a pretty good job of developing their people. Most of the, P&G is one of the companies that goes on to produce more CEOs than any other company in the world. But I also had a lot of chances to interact with a ton of other companies where it was just pretty obvious to me early on, Dave, that people were really struggling with finding themselves, finding a sense of meaning, finding a sense of purpose within their work, and trying to find the practical and pragmatic tools in a way that would really allow them to feel comfortable in their own skin and to be able to come out and be the best version of themselves. And I really felt like I had the tools, the capabilities, the skills, and the passion to find ways to be able to do that. And that began my journey of understanding the importance of mental strength in our lives, again, which we'll get into in a bit. But that's kind of really what started it all.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what is exactly mental strength. Is it the same thing as resilience, Scott?
Yeah, a lot of people ask that, Dave. Here's the way to think about it, Dave. Mental strength is the ability to regulate your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors, and to regulate that productively, even in the face of adversity, or as I like to shorthand it. It's how we manage internally so that we could lead better externally at work and in life. And it's not the same thing as resilience. It's not the same thing as emotional intelligence. Think about it this way. Mental strength is the broader umbrella. EQ is just a slice within that. And I think here's the thing, Dave. I think most of us, and you could tell me if you disagree, I think most of us intuitively understand that if you want to be successful in life, you already know that you can't just let your emotions hijack you. You can't just think whatever you want and behave in any way you for. You have to control that, but the problem is, Dave, newsflash, fresh off the press for your listeners, that is really hard to do. It can be really hard to do. And in a world that's growing only more chaotic, with more and more distractions, more and more opportunity for you to feel self-doubt and let self-doubt creep into your mind and into your heart, it's only going to get harder. So as we develop the tools and the habits and the skills, and that's what the Mentally Strong Leader, the book, is all about, to be able to have greater mental strength. I really do believe it's how you train your brain for achievement. It's what makes mental strength the leadership superpower of our times. And before I kind of go a layer down in detail on that, does that make sense to you, Dave? Right? Does that make good sense?
Yeah, completely. Because we're all living it every day, and especially these days, but always in business and in life. You're throwing curveballs, and it's how you respond and how you react. And how your team and other colleagues see how you're responding and reacting, which is going to set the tone for what's going to happen the rest of the day and the weeks and months that follow.
Yeah, that's right. And what's interesting is, as we've seen in our work, that when I say mental strength, it really breaks down to, this is what you were talking about in your intro, the mental muscles, right? There's 6 core mental muscles to mental strength, which are confidence, boldness, fortitude, or resilience, as you were asking in the beginning. That's just a slice of it. So there's confidence, boldness, resilience, decision-making skills, goal-focused skills, and then finally, what I call messaging skills, which is the ability as a leader to have an integrity to your intent and have a positivity to the way you communicate to the organization so that your messaging lifts them up. It doesn't drag them down. These are all the core skills of leadership that require kind of self-control and a calmness and an inner strength to be able to execute them. And people say, well, okay, Scott, I got it. But is mental strength, if those are 6 important things for leadership, what about like strategic thinking or vision setting? And of course, those things are important too. What our research has shown, Dave, and I'll tell you more about the research in a minute, but what it has shown is that these are the 6 facilities, the 6 mental muscles, if you will, that most correlate with achievement, that require the most self-control to put into place. Let's talk about confidence for a second as an example. You can be the most confident person in the world, Dave, and then you can have a really, really bad meeting and you get embarrassed and just like that, your confidence starts to spiral down and it begins to build on itself. If you don't have the self-control, the mental strength to maintain that confidence over time, that can be a real issue. So we're talking here about the 6 mental muscles that you need to exercise to maintain control over yourself so that you can ultimately achieve. And when I say exercise, I really encourage listeners to think about it that way, Dave. Let's go back to what you were talking about in the beginning about exercise. If you wanted to get really strong, of course, Dave, you'd go to the gym and you'd exercise those muscles, right? Of course, that's how you would do it. And how do you get stronger? Well, you need repetitions and you need to kind of lift those weights over time. If you were already strong and you stopped lifting weights, well, what would happen? Those muscles would kind of deteriorate. You become flabby over time. It's very similar with our mental muscles. They're a use it or lose it type thing. And what our research has shown is if you have the ability and the willingness to go back into that gym and exercise those core mental muscles over and over again, you can become mentally stronger. And by the way, the opposite of mentally strong is not mentally weak. We all have a baseline of mental strength to build from. You just have to be willing to get in that gym. And to help you with that, and then I'll pause for a second and make sure that's making sense. To help with that, Dave, you need the habits. In other words, the repetitions, like if you were in the gym, you need the daily habits to help you because this is hard. And that's what the mentally strong leader is based on. It has over 50 plus habit building tools that allow you to get the repetitions in so that you can build each of those mental muscles, which equates to improved mental strength or sustained mental strength over time, right? Does that make sense to you, Dave?
Yeah, it really does. And the analogy of the exercise and the habit is really critical here, to your point. And if you're okay with it, Scott, I would love to walk through some chapters of your book because
Yeah, sure.
there are each of these mental muscles that you just described. You've dedicated a chapter to each of them.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you're good with it, I'd love to just kind of step through that,
Yeah.
let you share the insights of those chapters and those habits, and obviously share any of the research that goes along with it. So, if you're good with that, I'd like to start with chapter 3, which is the Fortitude habit.
Yeah, sure. And I think a good setup for actually the Fortitude chapter, um, and some of the other chapters that follow is I'll tell you about one quick piece of research, and then that'll flow right into the Fortitude chapter. So one of the core pieces of research, Dave, that we did for the book that sets the whole thing up is, we asked over 3,000 leaders a simple question, right? Thinking of the highest achieving organizations that you've ever been a part of that overcame the most obstacles. What were the core attributes of the key leader at that point in time? And you'll see how this leads right into your question about fortitude. And so what we found every time we asked that question, Dave, between 91 to 92% of the time, remember, we asked this to over 3,000 executives, 91 to 92% of the time, they described the exact attributes that I just set up that relate to the core mental muscles. They talked about confidence, bold leaders that had great fortitude, which I'm going to get into more in a second, that were great at making decisions, that messaged the troops positively, and that had goal focus. And then we followed up, and this is where it gets really interesting. We followed up that piece of research, those 3,000 executives, and we said, okay, great, thank you. We asked you, thinking of the highest achieving organizations you've been in, describe the leaders. Okay, now we gave them a pick list and we said, now you have to describe that leader in 1 or 2 words. And we gave them a piece of paper with 100 choices on it. And, for different people, the choices were in different orders to, comb out order bias. And we said, circle what you think, just 1 or 2 words now describes that same leader who was incredible in times of adversity, that helped the organization achieve an enormous amount despite all the obstacles. And this was where it gets interesting, Dave, because 95% of the time, out of 100 choices, they circled mentally strong. And then when we follow up again and said, what are some of the first things that come to mind now with that mentally strong leader? Fortitude often came to the front first. And that's why it's the first of the 6 mental muscles that are broken down in a mentally strong leader. But, before I do a self-assessment, which I'll come back to. And then we get into each of the mental muscles. But now to your question, you're asking about the
That's interesting. I just want to interject real quick here, and I'm going to let you finish on fortitude. But it's interesting because I was waiting for you to say that folks determined that their best leaders were charismatic.
Yeah.
And that's not where you went.
It did not even appear in the top of our list, Dave. And of course, Dave, you've worked for leaders that are charismatic. You've worked for leaders that aren't charismatic. And of course, There's nothing wrong with charisma. That's an important portion of that. But what we're talking about here, when you think about mental strength, it doesn't take mental strength to be charismatic. And what we're talking about here are the 6 leadership capacities that most directly link, as we have proven in our research, to achievement and high performance. Is it important to be charismatic? Sure. Does our research show that it directly links to the highest performing organizations? Not necessarily. So that's probably why you didn't hear me talking about that, because we're talking about achievement drivers here. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And frankly, glad to hear it. Back to you on fortitude then.
Yeah. So I'll quickly walk through each of the muscles. Fortitude, of course, Dave, just by way of definition, so listeners are on the same page. It's the ability to push through challenges onward towards achievement, right? And this requires a lot of different things from us, and so I'm just going to highlight a couple of things you don't normally think about with fortitude. So one of the biggest things that's needed for fortitude is you have to be good at solving problems, right? Because if you're not, the first time a barrier comes up, you're not going to have the resilience and the fortitude to push through it. You're going to just kind of break down in the face of problems. So, why aren't we all good at solving problems to feed our fortitude? Well, what gets in the way is what I call the static trap, Dave. And this is where, a couple of things happen. We can, first of all, we can be static when the problem shows up, meaning we deny that the problem exists. We do nothing about it until what? Until it no longer can be ignored. Then what happens? Then we create static or distortion, right? By making excuses about why the problem exists. We downplay its impact, or we redirect attention by finger pointing. And then even when we acknowledge that the problem exists, we can remain static by not moving fast enough to do something about it. So, I polled organizations to find out what were some of the biggest barriers to high performance and to their ability to be resilient in the face of adversity. And quite often we would hear versions of, we're not good at problem solving. When we dig into that, it's because of the static trap. We can be static. We can create static when we acknowledge the problem, and then we can remain static. One more element of fortitude that people don't often think of, Dave. And, the book is filled. There are, multiple tools on how you can build your fortitude capacity. And so I'm talking about a few tools now that are in the book for each mental muscle. Another thing about fortitude that people don't often think about, Dave, is it takes fortitude to engage in difficult conversations. Now, would you rate yourself, Dave, as pretty good, poor, indifferent, great, on having difficult conversations? How would you rate yourself?
At this point in my life and career, I'd say I'm pretty good.
Yeah, right. And it takes time. So this might really resonate with you that, it's a different kind of fortitude though, because no one looks forward to having difficult conversations. But what happens is, we don't understand how to prepare for and then conduct. And in this chapter on fortitude in the mentally strong leader, I talk about how important it is to understand that the source of tension you're expecting in a difficult conversation impacts how you should prepare for that difficult conversation. And I'll give you an example. Say you've got someone that works for you at Behind the Numbers, Dave, and you've got to have a tough conversation with them. There could be a lot of sources of tension. It could be, emotions, the nature of your relationship. Maybe there's a lack of familiarity for that person with the role. Maybe there's a lack of control that you feel that you have in your role. A big source of tension, though, is often the power structure, which is this. You either have more power, less power, or equal power to the person you're going to have the difficult conversation with. And that creates its own problems. If you have more power going into this difficult conversation, the odds are you might fall into a pattern of maybe being too authoritative, or you're worried about being too authoritative and you're going to crush their spirit. If you have less power than them, the person you're going to have a difficult conversation with, you might be worried, well, oh, it's my boss's boss and I'm going to shut down like I always do. And I'm not going to speak my mind and I'm going to take whatever he or she says at face value and that'll be it. And I won't defend myself. If you have equal power to the person you're going to have a difficult conversation with, you might be worried that, well, they're not beholden to me. So they're not even going to be listening. So understanding whether you enter that relationship with more, less, or equal power, the only thing you can do to prepare is to commit to change your patterns. You can't change the nature of your relationship to that person. You can't change that you have more power than them, that you're higher in the organization, or that you have less, or that you're equal. But what you can change is the patterns of how you show up given that power dynamic. And once we understand that, it starts to give us the fortitude and the resilience to tackle and enter difficult conversations with energy and belief, right? Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, and it resonates because at the end of the day, leadership is an internal game,
Yeah, right.
and as is confidence. And you touched on confidence a little bit, but confidence is a topic that comes up on this program a lot when we talk
Yeah.
about leadership and things like imposter syndrome, and even like with our kids. And we have to remind them that, as I do, that confidence is the memory of success, and
Yes.
thinking about a time when maybe helps you overcome going down that rabbit hole of the lost confidence spiral.
Yeah, that's right, Dave. And we'll move into the confidence chapter now. And again, there's all kinds of tools to help the listener build their confidence in this chapter in the mentally strong leader. And one the thing I like to say first that's really important for listeners is you have to understand that confidence is not a lack of self-doubt. It's not. It's your ability to manage your relationship with doubt. And I can tell you, Dave, that even the most confident people that I interviewed, and the thousands of people I interviewed for the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, even the most confident people, they will tell you that it's not that they're, you know, confident 100% of the time. They have their small slivers of doubt. It's just how they manage that relationship with it. And a lot of it has to do with their level of self acceptance. And in the book, I have a really powerful tool I call the self acceptance scale that helps you to understand the degradations in self confidence that can happen over time. And if the more you're aware of these little degradations, the more that you can interject on yourself and help control them to maintain your confidence. So, for example, if you the listeners out there, if you're on your treadmill or whatever, picture a scale, and there's a bunch of points on the scale. On the left side of the scale is self acceptance. And that's what you want. That's where you want to be, where your mental strength is strong, and you're accepting yourself and your quirks and your flaws, and all in life is good. But what happens is life happens to us. And one degradation after another happens. And in the first degradation, now, listener, I want you to picture we're moving to the right of the scale, one notch at a time. You're self-accepting, but then you start engaging in slivers of approval seeking, trying to get others to external validate you. Then you might start comparing to others, the next degradation of self-acceptance, where, some comparison is good. And I'm not saying that's not the case, but I'm talking about where you're making irrelevant comparisons to people that don't matter. and you start to feel lesser than. Then the negative inner chatter starts to kick in. The next notch over on the lack of self-acceptance, the next erosion. Before you know it, you're thinking, I'm not enough. And finally, you end up on the right-hand side of the scale, Dave, which you had mentioned, where your mental strength has broken down enough that you actually believe that you're not good enough. You actually believe you don't belong, and imposter syndrome really starts to kick in. So it starts with an awareness of the natural ways our self-confidence erodes over time. Then, armed with that, you can use tools in the book to build whatever slice of that is bringing you down, right? Does that make sense, Dave? And I'm wondering, have you found yourself migrating from your own, level of self-acceptance at times?
Oh, 100%, right? I think any human would be lying to you if they told you that they didn't have moments where there's a wobble, for sure. And when you talk about confidence, I've read somewhere, and I forget the statistic, the percentage, you may know it offhand, but it's in the 90 percentile of the conversations that we have with ourselves, the chatter in our own head, the head trash garbage. Um, that's all negative self-talk.
Oh,
And
yeah. Yeah.
the advice, of course, is you would never talk to your friends like that. Why are you talking to yourself like that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you really have to, you got to stop beating yourself up for beating yourself up, right? And you got to get better at catching yourself doing it. Which, Dave, I don't know, does that ever happen to you? I teach this stuff, Dave, and I still have those moments where I'll be like, wait a minute, I've been pounding on myself for like the last 3 minutes internally. Why am I doing that? I've gotten better over time at catching when I'm beating myself up. And like you said, it really is important to talk to your friend, to talk to yourself like a friend in need at that point, and to remember what I call the 90-10 rule, which is a formula, a ratio, if you will, Dave, for how you should value yourself, which is to say that 90% of how you should value yourself and your worth in life should be based on internal validation, 10% on external validation. 90% of how you value yourself should be based on self-worth, self-appreciation, self-love, 10% on the occasional slice of external validation that we get from other people. And sometimes people will say, Dave, but come on, Scott, you're a business motivational speaker. Shouldn't you be pushing the 100-0 rule, where 100% of how you feel about yourself should come only from your own external, your own internal evaluations, and never from anyone else? That's a nice theory, Dave, but it's just not life, right? We all need that occasional slice of external validation to tell us that we're worthy and worthwhile, that we're valued and valuable. The problem arises, Dave, when that 10% that we need, that external validation, becomes 90, 100% of what we need to feel good about ourselves. The problem arises when we start to chase approval instead of authenticity. The problem arises when we forget that we need to be focusing on, not on winning love, but on giving love. And I've found that if you use the combination of those tools and the combination of the tools in the book, The Men, a Strong Leader, you really can sustain your confidence over time. You don't get perfect at it, right? Because you have to remember, it's not the lack of self-doubt. That's not what confidence is. It's your ability to manage your relationship with it.
Yeah, and when you talk about the external validation, I was just jotting down some notes here because there's two things I just wanted to share that came to my mind. One is, in this social media driven world with the hit of dopamine for every like that you get on a
Yeah.
post, external validation is very important for some.
Yeah.
And I totally understand your ratio and why that makes sense. But just a quick reminder for leaders when they're thinking about interacting with their teams, a little bit of external validation to your teammates goes a long way, because people genuinely do want to be appreciated. Maybe they don't need to hear it every day of their life, but an acknowledgement of, hey, nice job, well done, you're valued, you're appreciated, really goes a long way for keeping people motivated.
Yeah, it really does. It doesn't take that much. Dave, I'm sure you could think back to your days in whatever time you spent in the corporate world. I'm sure you can think back and remember, boy, you sure as heck remember the day that someone, really gave you bad feedback. You don't forget those days. But you're equally likely to remember the other side of the scale, where someone just gave you a meaningful, heartfelt slice of external kind of appreciation. It can really make a difference, just like the opposite can make a negative impact on you. So,
Oh yeah, 100%. And I've written about it in a couple of my books. Scott, this is an awesome conversation. I do need to I'll call it accelerate just a little bit
Yeah.
here, because otherwise you and I are going to have a 2 hour conversation,
Sure.
which we could do easily. But I do want to touch on each of these other mental muscles in some degree here. And
Yeah.
it's fine going over 30 minutes. Don't worry about that part. But I want to talk about boldness, because I think in my mind, a lot of times boldness is associated with making a big decision, taking something in a different direction that maybe assumes risk.
Yeah, it's boldness. It's really about paving a direct pathway to growth, Dave. It forces you to push your thinking. It helps you get out of grooves and press past discomfort. And one of the big tools I share in the Mentally Strong Leader to help you build your own sense of boldness as a leader is to encourage leaders to establish the rules of risk taking. Right, and if people don't understand what the rules are, they're not likely to take risks, right? So imagine as a leader, and I have 20 questions in the book that outline this. What if you as a leader spelled out what constitutes a good risk? What does a bad risk look like? What happens if you take a risk and somebody succeeds or if somebody fails? What, who needs to be comfortable with what level of risk that I'm taking? What assumptions need to be true to take a certain kind of risk? And so I have 20 specific questions that you can sit down with your organization and say, let's answer these questions together. And what happens is once people understand the rules of risk taking, Dave, they're far more likely to be bold and to take risks that are defined and outlined in a smart way. And here's the thing, Dave, if you sat down with a leader and said, I want to understand the rules of risk taking, no leader would say, well, the rules are don't take any ever. Nobody would do that. It's about degrees of risks and, show me what that looks like. And when you define it, I have seen it transform organizations, Dave, where I bring in a list of, the 20 questions that are in the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, in the Boldness chapter. And the leader sits down with the organization. We have a discussion around those questions. They understand the rules. It changes the game on the boldness front.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And look, on the risk spectrum, it's a balancing act of risk and reward. What's the ROI of the risk taking? So interesting stuff there, Scott. Let you talk a little bit about the others, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Talk about messaging, decision making, and then goal focus, because I want to spend a little more time at the back end to talk a little bit about the mental action plan.
Yeah, I'll hit each of these really quick. The messaging habit, Dave, that's all about, remembering that, as a leader, employees are constantly taking cues from you. Whether you like it or not, that is what's happening. They're watching you, and you have the opportunity to have a very positive, intent on them. You can have your messaging can be positive and energizing, or it can be negative and sapping in the way you conduct yourself. And it takes mental strength. This is why it's a core mental muscle to really message in a positive way to the troops. So you'll find in the book a lot of tools about how to choose to stay positive, make choices to stay positive, which can be hard to do in today's world. You'll find tools about how to navigate negative emotions in the moment, right? I also talk a lot, Dave, about staying focused on your goals in the book. That's another mental muscle. And goal focus, of course, is exactly what it sounds like. Wayward thoughts and emotions and actions can distract you from what you're trying to accomplish. So how for you and your organization can you keep them focused on the goals at hand? It takes tremendous mental strength to be able to do that. So you'll see a lot of tools in the chapter on goal focus about how to set a thorough set of expectations, not just numerically, but cultural expectations, well-being expectations, uh, expectations for how you want the organization to show up in adversity so that they can stay focused on their goal. And lastly, I also have a chapter on the sixth mental muscle of decision making that helps lie out classic decision-making biases, how you can overcome them, things that get in our way of making good, sharp, smart decisions, things that get in the way of us being able to be decisive. And based on all of that, you'll walk away with a lot of tools to be a better decision maker and be more decisive along the way too.
Yeah, lots of great value in this book here, Scott, and I appreciate you sharing it with the world. Talk a little bit about the mental action plan, and
Yeah.
how do we understand which muscles we need to really focus on at any particular
Yeah,
time?
yeah. Chapter 2 of the book, Dave, is the mental strength self-assessment, and it's 50 questions That's it. And I'm going to give it an address at the end here where your listeners can download this assessment for free if they would like to. It's a 50-question assessment. And it takes you maybe 15 minutes, but while it takes you 15 minutes, it took me over 2 years to develop this with data scientists to make sure it was as tight as I wanted it to be. And what happens, Dave, when you take these, this self-assessment, is it produces a mental strength score for you. So you understand what your starting point is, and it gives you a score by mental muscle. So what's your Fortitude score? Boldness, confidence score, decision-making, goal focus, and your messaging score. And then what happens, Dave, is it puts you in one of 4 tiers. And again, you got to remember, the opposite of mentally strong is not mentally weak. We all have a baseline to work with. But once you take this assessment, you'll understand what your baseline is. And, maybe you'll score at the highest, level, which only 6% of people do, by the way, that take this out of over, 20,000 data points I have. The highest levels where you're a beacon of mental strength. People are drawn to you. The quote unquote lowest level, is where you're just a novice. You're learning about the concept of mental strength. But the thing is, Dave, it gives you a unique place to start that's 100% tailored to you, individually to you. That, one of my biggest pet peeves with keynoters and trainers is, they do a carte blanche that applies to everybody. When you take this self-assessment, you start from a place and you understand, okay, maybe I need more work on my confidence than I thought I did. Maybe I'm bolder than I really thought that I was. And you get a score. And then from that, you can start to develop your own personal training regimen using the habits and the tools in the book that, for every chapter, and there's over 50 plus habits to build and tools to help you build those habits in the book. And then you build your own customized mental strength training program to build the mental muscles that you want to either strengthen or maintain, right? Does that make sense, Dave?
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that with the audience. Scott, I know we're getting close to the end here, and before I ask you to tell the world how they can find you, I want to give you a chance to talk about some of the other things you've written. You've written a few other books.
Yeah, another a very popular book I've written is called "Leading from the Middle." It's exactly what it sounds like. It's how to help folks that are in the middle of their organization, middle managers, influence up, down, and across the organization. And by the way, Dave, in case for listeners out there thinking, well, I don't think of myself as a middle manager. Guess what? By my definition, almost all of us are, because it's about that power dynamic that anybody who has to lead up in the organization, or down, or across, or any combination of those, to do their job well, by definition, is a middle manager. It's about the power dynamic of being caught in the middle and having to manage in 360 degrees. So yeah, Leading from the Middle is another very popular book of mine.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. And I know that's going to resonate with a lot of the audience because, let's face it, we've all been taught early in the career how you've got to learn how to manage up.
Yes.
Well, what does that mean, and how do you really do it?
That's right. And in the book, in that Leading from the Middle goes into a lot of detail about how to manage your boss, how to manage your employees effectively, and how to manage teams and your peers as well, and even have influence over your peers, people who don't report to you.
Yeah, that could be a whole other show that I would love to explore with you some other time.
Yeah, for sure.
But for now, tell the audience how they can find you, how they can connect with you, how they can get your books.
Yeah, sounds good. Not a shocker. I have my own website. You can go to scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. You can find out about all the keynotes that I give, all the trainings that I give, and the workshops that I give. And also, for the listeners at home, if they're interested, if you go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, you can download for free the 60-page PDF of the mental strength self-assessment that I was talking about, Dave. That again, it has all the questions in there, and it gives you starting points for, okay, so if my score is this, what do I do next, and how do I think about it? And it sets you up for all the tools that you can use in the Mentally Strong Leader. So again, if you want the mental strength self-assessment for free, scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift. And if you want to just check me out in my books and my keynotes, you can just go to scottmautz.com.
And I will make sure that I include that in the show notes so that people can click on it easily so you can get right there. Scott, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It was really a lot of fun having you on Behind the Numbers.
Thanks so much, Dave. Really appreciate the opportunity.
A pleasure. And thank you out there for tuning in to Behind the Numbers. We really appreciate you doing that. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment, leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcast. That feedback always helps us. helps us to grow and bring you even more great content. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another episode. Until next time, I'm Dave Bookbinder, reminding you that the numbers tell the story, but the people bring it to life. Take care, everybody.